There's nothing more blinding than prejudice. Out of the most common prejudices, one of the most common prejudices is against what is local and familiar. There is a story told of a Filipino senator who was in a 5-star hotel in London. He asked for a bottle of the best rum you have. The waiter came back with a bottle of Filipino rum. The senator shouted at him, "I told you to get me the best, not just local stuff you can buy at any shop." The waiter held his ground. "Sir, you asked for the best rum, and this is the best we can get." Prejudice is a great block to truth. There's another story about a travelling circus that was on the outskirts of a village. One evening a fire broke out in the circus camp, and there was a danger that the fire would spread across the fields of dry stubble to burn the village itself. The circus manager looked for someone to send to warn the villagers. The only person he could find was the clown, who was already made up for his act. The clown hurried to the village and begged people to come to help to put out the fire at the circus and save themselves from the firestorm. The people only laughed at him. They thought this was a brilliant piece of advertising on the part of the management. The more the clown tried to look serious and begged them to take him seriously, the more they applauded and rolled around in laughter. The harder he tried to tell them that it was no trick, the more they laughed at him. Finally, the fire did reach the village and burned it. Basically, the reason they couldn't hear the message was that they looked at the man as a clown, and this made it impossible for them to hear the truth of what he was trying to say. In the story we read in today's Gospel, we encounter Jesus, probably feeling very like the waiter trying to convince the senator, or the clown trying to convince the villagers. He's come to Nazareth, his hometown, to bring them the good news and the healing that he's brought to other towns in Galilee. But the message never got a chance. The people rejected the messenger. He was telling them what he told the others: the need to change, the need to live differently, to be part of the kingdom. But they didn't want to hear that kind of message, so they diverted from it by focusing on his person. They knew all about him. Who did he think he was anyway? After all, wasn't he just one of themselves? They knew the carpenter shop that he'd worked in. They knew his mother and his brothers and sisters. There was nothing he could teach them. They were frozen in prejudice, and there was no way there that his message could melt the ice in their hearts. Mark tells us this story of Jesus being rejected in his hometown, and then immediately leads on to the sending out of his disciples to share the good news of God's love and acceptance and presence, and the need to live as if you are part of the kingdom. And as they go, an integral part of the message is what to do when you are rejected. Don't be concerned. Shake off the dust and move on. Then before they return, Mark interjects another story, and it's the beheading of John the Baptist. Now that is a full-on rejection. In the snippet we heard from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, Paul is angry and he's trying to defend himself from criticism and rejection. even as he does so, he remembers God's grace and that compassion is the key to living in the kingdom, the realm of God. One thing that stood out for me this week is the reminder that it's in our everyday lives that we find God at work. That's one of the joys of the Western Church, rediscovering the prayers of the Celts, which acknowledge God's presence in daily life, as exemplified in our first hymn this morning. It may well be through the everyday, familiar people of our lives that God's best message will come from. So let's not be too quick to reject it. It needs a decision to be open to hearing the message, whoever brings it. It may well mean listening to those we think we know, or to children, or to people that we often disagree with, and then to be humble enough to let it affect our actions and attitudes. We don't like having to back down or change, even while we know at some level that that is what will enable us to live out the experience of the life of the kingdom, the abundant eternal life of wholeness and inner health that Jesus and his disciples wanted to share. One thing that prayer should be doing in our lives is opening our hearts to reality and to truth. To do this, it must be unmasking our illusions and melting our prejudices. I've returned to Jerry here. Unfortunately, much of our wordy prayers is directed to reinforcing our make-believe world. Once we believe that we know what we want from God, we try to phrase it nicely and keep on demanding it. And this process becomes a way of blocking us from hearing what God might want to say. Jerry goes on, we might be like the man who prayed for a yellow flower. He got a thorny cactus and threw it out the window. While he was ranting about God's failure to answer him, the cactus was blooming in a beautiful yellow flower out the window. If we're afraid of what God might say, as the people of Nazareth were afraid of the challenge to change their attitudes that Jesus was demanding of them, we keep God at a distance. That message may be coming from anyone. Listening prayer will demand change from us towards wholeness and integrity and integration in our lives as carriers of God's good news. Our lives will then reflect God's way, the truth, the life of compassion and self-giving that Jesus spoke of and lived out. And of course, it's in our everyday lives that we, like the apostles, are the carriers of this good news, this healing. Some people will hear it gladly, others won't. Don't be surprised at that. Don't let reactions from other people affect your cheerful living and sharing of the way of Jesus. I'm going to suggest we pause in silence now for a few minutes. I'm going to suggest that during the week you take longer periods of silence. Deep wisdom has always held that in silence you cannot continue in prejudice and untruth or anything that's inauthentic. So this is a way of being more in touch with the authentic message God gives to you and expects you to give to others. Let's sing now hymn 636.